You are listening to New Theory Radio. New Theory Radio.
Hello and welcome to another edition of New Theory Radio, here live on News Talk Saga 960 AM. My name is Nav Nanwa, I'm your host, and this is the show where we theorize on all things current affairs, pop culture, and everyday life. It is our special best of edition of New Theory Radio. We are going to take a special look back on the first year that we've experienced here on Saga 960 AM. And we are doing that because next week we are going to be celebrating our 1 year anniversary here on the station. So it's going to be quite the look back at the last year when it comes to some of our favorite discussions and conversations. In addition to this, we're also going to be joined later in the show by Nadir Chaudhry and April Hussain, who represent Maskwell. Maskwell is an organization focused on building reusable masks that feature high-efficiency replaceable filters to help keep people healthy during uncertain times. It's no secret with the current COVID-19 pandemic that wearing a mask is becoming more normal each and every day, especially as you go about going to get your groceries, or even going for a walk, or the fact that more retail stores are opening up. A lot of retail stores are actually forcing customers to wear masks if they want to enter into the store itself. And both April and Nadir talk about what Maskwell is, talk about the value proposition. These masks are locally designed, they're reusable, and they actually contain high-efficiency MERV 13 filters. And if you don't know what a MERV 13 filter is, you certainly want to listen to the interview as Nadir explains in more detail what these filters are all about. Plus, they have a really great community angle associated with a purchase of a mask. So if you want to learn more, you do not want to miss this conversation regarding Maskwell with both Nadir and April. As well, we alluded to it on social media. We have a very special announcement that we're going to be making at the end of the show regarding some changes that we are making to New Theory Radio. I've been treating this quarantine as an opportunity to reset and reflect, or reflect and reset. That's been my go-to, my motto during this entire time. And we've definitely done that with NTR. And I'm very excited for these new changes that we're going to be implementing starting next week. And I know you will be as well. So keep it locked to the very end as we share with you what this announcement is all about. As someone who has a platform each and every week, I would be remiss if I didn't address the events of this week, the events involving the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, as well as the situation involving Regis Kurchinski-Paquette here locally in Toronto, even as far as earlier in the week with the situation in New York involving Amy Cooper and Chris Cooper. It's been one of the most draining weeks that I could recall when it comes to just being frustrated with the system and being frustrated with ideologies. Being someone who is a strong supporter of Black culture, who feels like a guest in this culture, who some of my closest friends are Black. I feel for them. And I feel for what they're going through right now. And as someone who's not their color, you can feel hopeless in a situation like this. And I think it's very important that now more than ever, we really stand behind our brothers and sisters and we take care of them and we speak out against injustice and racism. And we make sure that these things are not tolerated regardless of your skin color. But far too many times we've seen the same situation happen. And I think that if you are someone that has a platform, if you are someone that has a following, if you are someone that elicits conversation, you need to be a part of the solution and you can't be a part of the problem. And I think being a part of the solution is really addressing what's going on and helping and assisting in ways that this can be stopped. These aren't the views of News Talk Saga 960 AM. These are the views solely of us here at New Theory Radio. But I do thank Saga 960 AM for providing us this platform. And what I would suggest is that everyone take some time and they do some research on what's going on and they lend a helping hand. And we finally put an end to injustice and racism, because we cannot, as a society, keep living like this, especially when it happens here locally. I know a lot of people feel most of the time that this is a U.S. issue. That's not necessarily true. This week was a prime example of how these issues can happen close to home. I urge everybody to take a stand for what they believe in. And I just want to leave you with a quote from James Baldwin, who is a fantastic writer. And this quote really resonated with me. And it's simply this. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. Let's make sure that we're not denying anyone of their humanity or their right to exist, and that we're truly, truly doing our part to go against racism and injustice. R.I.P. George Floyd, R.I.P. Regis Kurchinski-Paquette, Black Lives Matter. And on that note, we are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back with more New Theory Radio here on News Talk Saga 960 AM.
You are listening to New Theory Radio. Theory Radio.
Hello and welcome back to New Theory Radio here on News Talk Saga 960 AM. My name is Nav Nanwa. I am your host, and this is the show where we theorize on all things current affairs, pop culture, and everyday life. It is our special best of edition of New Theory Radio. We are celebrating 1 year on News Talk Saga 960 AM by looking back at our favorite discussions and conversations over the last 12 months. As well, we are preparing for our first anniversary show next week, which will involve some changes that we're making to NTR. So keep it locked to the very end of this episode to find out what those changes are. But just to continue on with this look back, right now I want to intro a conversation that I had with Canadian hip-hop star Shad K. Yes, we had the opportunity to talk with Shad at the Polaris Prize 2019 event last September. His album, A Short Story About War, was shortlisted for a Polaris Prize. But Shad also is known for the amazing work that he's done on the Netflix series called Hip Hop Evolution, which, if you ask me, has done a fantastic job in really showcasing the history behind hip hop. It's actually gone on and won a Peabody Award, and it's something that you should definitely check out, especially if you're looking for stuff to watch during the quarantine. Go watch Hip Hop Evolution and get educated on the art form. So we talk about that. We talk about his album. We talk about a whole bunch of different topics when it comes to Shad and the amazing work that he's doing. And I urge you to check out the conversation right now. Test, 1 2 1 2. We are live here at the Polaris Music Prize Gala, and it's an honor for me to be joined by one of Canada's dope MCs. He's somebody that's been in the game for quite some time now, but he's always reinventing himself. His project, A Short Story About War, is nominated for a Polaris Prize this evening, and he's also known for a fantastic documentary that's currently on Netflix called Hip Hop Evolution, which is teaching everybody and their mom all about hip hop and the origins. It is Shad. Shad, what's going on, on, man. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you for having me. It's funny you say like teaching everyone and their mom. That's like actually one of the director's goals with the show.
Really?
Was he was like, I want my dad to be able to watch this.
Yeah. No, and it's fascinating because I think I was just telling you right now that even my dad has seen an episode, and he was telling me, because it's kind of embarrassing, but I used to get XXL magazines sent to my house, and I felt my dad would read them, not because he needed stuff to read on the toilet, but I think he would read them just because he wanted to connect with me and my brother and kind of see what we were into.
Yes.
But your documentaries like Hip Hop Evolution do a fantastic job in just teaching anybody and everybody what hip hop is all about. Being a hip hop nerd, just like yourself, what does it mean to you to be associated with a project like that? Because you're literally, we're meeting all these legends through your eyes and through your interactions. Did you ever have a nerd out moment when you were kicking it, maybe in the Bronx with some of these legends?
It was nonstop nerd out moments.
Yeah.
Really. And the cool thing about the show is that I can do that and it's okay. Yeah. Because it's part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get these artists to go back to these seminal moments with us and tell the stories. A lot of the show is like, I do some narrations, but I'm not really editorializing or anything like that. The show is really the legends telling their stories. So me fanning out a lot of times actually helps to that end, because it kind of helps them remember how amazing it was, what they've done, and get in touch with the fact that it is special, because all of our lives become commonplace to us, no matter what it is that you've done. So to put people in touch with that feeling is actually part of the job, I think.
Is there an opportunity to eventually steer the show into talking about Canadian hip hop and Toronto specifically?
I don't think we're gonna get there.
Okay.
Not our show, but that will be a story to be told. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The way I think of the show is I think of it as a great general overview.
Yeah.
If you want to trace where this music started and how it's evolved, this is a great overview.
Totally.
Bird's eye view, but there's a lot of more specific stories to be told, a lot.
Yeah.
And the story of Canadian hip-hop is definitely a very interesting one, because having gone to a lot of these different cities now, you come to learn that actually hip-hop was in Toronto before it was in a lot of places in America.
Yeah.
Just because of the connection, the kind of family connections, between New York and Toronto through immigration. People coming from the West Indies in the 60s and 70s, like Kool Herc, like KRS-One,
exactly.
Biggie. Some of their family either landed in New York, or they landed in Toronto, or they landed in the UK, and a lot of the essential elements of hip-hop culture come from that part of the world.
Totally.
Anyhow, all that to say, Canadian hip-hop is a story that deserves to be told at some point.
Yeah, and I'm so happy you kind of talk about the Caribbean influence, because I remember hearing that KRS-One started including patois on a lot of his records because he used to kick it with Michi Me back when he would come to Toronto. And it's like facts like that I totally love, that I think a lot of people fail to appreciate when it comes to the Toronto scene. And the reason why I bring it up, and we will be talking about your album in just a few moments, because obviously it's super dope, but I also appreciate the fact that you kick it with some of those movers and shakers from like the mid 90s to early 2000 hip hoppers. Like, you were on the Father Time 2018 edition. The Brick House EP with Socrates is super nerdy for me to really enjoy. But that record was just crazy, because that's a New York sound, but it's from Toronto, and it was so relevant to that time.
Yeah, talking to him, talking to Maestro, really fascinating, to know what they were influenced by at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, a lot of New York hip-hop, and again, not just because it was broadcast here, but because they literally were connected through family. They were going to New York all the time, and the cultural roots of hip hop. But then also that UK connection, like Sox was really influenced by what was happening in the UK as well, and like Dream Warriors were very popular in the UK, you know. Sure. So there's all of these interesting connections, especially when you talk to those cats. And yeah, I mean, obviously, Sox got love from Pharaoh, from Common, did records with all these people. There's amazing history, you know. We can come to think it all kind of began with Drake, but we have artists that have made tremendous strides, you know what I mean, before that.
Totally. So, moving on to your album, Short Story About War, I think I told you earlier, I've been following your career since The Old Prince. I remember seeing you back in McMaster, rocking the Ouch stage. I think it was like the Hamilton Convention Center. Seeing your progression as an artist is truly interesting because you can definitely sense just, who you were back then as someone who was coming up very hungry, that was very much focused on the bars and the real hip-hop, to now constructing a story with your album, A Short Story About War. And what I find interesting about it is you went the concept album route with this one. In the age of streaming, and on my show, New Theory Radio, we like to theorize on many different things. So I want to get your theories on concept albums and just forcing the listener to not listen to an album in pieces, because I know a lot of artists. I've had the pleasure of actually consulting for a bunch of artists when it comes to them bringing their albums out to the market. And the thought process has changed in regards to, hey, I need to focus on a single that's gonna get a lot of streams versus putting together an entire project. What was your approach like on A Short Story?
Yeah, it is a really interesting time. I mean, every time I put out an album, I feel like the landscape from a business standpoint is completely different. I think, for example, in 2005, I made my first album in June. At that point, there was no YouTube. There was no Facebook. Wasn't really in Canada.
Was that straight high five or?
It was MySpace.
Okay.
It was MySpace, and it was physical copies. Were your thing, and then downloads to some extent as well. But that was the landscape. And there was a lot of music media. A lot more than there is now. So, and blogs were starting. To be a thing. So all that to say, the landscape has completely changed. I think now the interesting challenge is you really have to understand who you are as an artist, because there's a lot of different lanes, so to speak. You know what I mean? I do think that my core fans still think of me as an album artist. So, and I happen to like making albums. So I feel okay about that. Now, if there were like a kid who was 16 who was coming out and what he did was just so in touch with what was happening right now, I would not recommend making a concept album. I would say, hey, do what comes natural to you. If that's singles, if that's TikTok, memes, then do that, because they all can work. They all can work. It's just a matter of who you are as an artist and finding where that intersects with how people like to listen to music. With this album, I was thinking I was more interested in telling the story of the album, whether that's people actually hearing the album or hearing an interview with me talking about the album or something. I just wanted to communicate this story that felt special to me, felt imaginative, and felt meaningful, however that might work, and whenever that might work, because I also know that now my favorite artist might drop an album and I might listen to it in 6 months. And it's not because they're not my favorite artist, it's just how it is. So I also felt like that with making a project like this. People might not hear it right away, but that's fine.
There's one line in the album, it's in the first track, because I studied business, and it's a snippet of a female talking about how in business school they teach you to step on people and to get what you want. You studied business in your undergrad as well.
I did.
So how much when it came to putting this whole album together, and some of the messages that are all throughout this record, I find very intriguing, because you're talking about politics, you're talking about economics, you're talking about things that are happening in our neighborhoods when it comes to police involvement. How did you almost narrow down what topics you wanted to tackle, and was that a part of the war overarching arc that you were trying to talk about?
So really it all came out of the story. So it was I saw this war world, and it was one of these instances where suddenly I'm seeing all the meanings come out of it. So I wasn't trying to sort of put the meanings into it as much as I was just seeing, this is what that that means. So, like, for example, that first song you were talking about, the sniper.
Yeah.
It's like I saw the sniper and I was like, oh, this is what that means. This is sort of like the whole thing of elevation.
Yeah.
And in our society, what we're taught, what I was taught, which is like you want to get higher education,
totally.
higher status, higher income. This is how you create safety for yourself.
Yeah.
And a kind of power. And it was like I saw a sniper, and then right away it's like I saw the metaphor.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's how everything kind of came about. But you're right, a lot of it does touch on economics and kind of what our economic system does to us.
Yeah.
In the way that it makes us see each other as competition instead of as brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Because the one part, if we want to keep moving on throughout the album, when you talk about the fool, it's almost like the dude playing it safe. Like almost like a lot of us that just are just gonna keep it regular and not try to go against the grain a bit.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like that character I found so interesting. Again, this is just somebody that I saw in the middle of this war scenario and bullets flying, who just doesn't believe that the bullets are real.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's I guess what I interpreted from that is that's someone who sees this frenzy of competition we live in and goes, it's not real. Mm-hmm. It's not true. Mm-hmm. The fundamental reality is that we are literally related.
Yeah.
We are literally family. We are not enemies.
Yeah.
And how kind of true but also naive that is.
Yeah.
And is it possible, I guess the question of is it possible to walk through life with that mentality? What would that mean? What would that look like?
Yeah.
Super deep, man. But it's an enjoyable listen. It's the one album that you have a lot of bangers on there, but I feel like I can only consume it in entirety. Because like it's just again I'm part of the shuffle era where sometimes I just let the iPhone or iPad or whatever go on shuffle. Yeah. But when it comes across to your tracks, I just almost have to throw it on and kind of catch the vibe a little bit. And was there any, before we kind of wrap up, was there any album that you like that kind of influenced you to kind of go down this route?
Well, I'm really influenced by. I guess by great albums and like innovative albums. I love what Kendrick does. Blows my mind.
100%. Yeah.
Really blows my mind and makes me go, how can I make people feel like that, in the sense of feeling lost in a world when they listen to my music? Yeah. How can they feel like they're in a different world?
Yeah.
Because I really admire that about what he's able to achieve in the studio. He can just make you feel transported, you know what I mean? And so he's definitely someone I admire in that respect.
Because Good Kid, Mad City, same thing, man. I can't listen to that in chunks.
No, and the songs are great on their own, but you want to, man, that feeling the first time you hear that album of just being immersed in this world, you feel like you're somewhere else,
totally.
And that's like a mix of his great songwriting and this great production, but also the detail in the studio that he went into of, the sirens at this point kind of low, or the voice turning up and then fading out, and a lot of hard work and a lot of details. So
that's dope, man. One last thing, what are you working on now? Obviously this album has kind of really allowed you to really diversify yourself when it comes to you being an MC. Do you foresee maybe doing more of these types of albums, or are we going to see the old Prince kicking it one more time?
To be honest, that's where I kind of would love to go back to. I'd love to do something that just feels good. Feels really loose and fun and easy to listen to is what I'd love to do next.
Okay.
Yeah, something that feels really easy to listen to, because I do love that, and I do feel like that's probably what I do best. So
awesome.
And then one last thing before we kind of wrap this up, we're going back to Hip Hop Evolution. Who's been, I guess, name your top 2 or top 3 top interviews that you were like, man, this was super sick?
Busta Rhymes will be up there. He's just a great guy and so generous talking about other artists, which isn't always the case. You know, some people are, for legitimate reasons, very concerned with their own legacy and don't necessarily want to talk about who else they're a fan of. But Busta was super generous, and who else is up there? KRS-One is just an experience, amazing experience.
The teacher, man.
The teacher. He's a special cat. So yeah, KRS is there. Who else would be up there? Q-Tip, just on a personal level. You know, Love Tip. Pause. You know, some of those guys that like I'm a crazy fan of. Big Boy, CeeLo. You know.
Crazy.
Special thanks to Shad K for speaking with us last year, and we are going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to have more New Theory Radio after this.
Theory Radio.
And we are back here on New Theory Radio, here live on News Talk Saga 960 AM, the show where we theorize on all things current affairs, pop culture, and everyday life. This is our special best of edition of New Theory Radio, as we're revisiting some of our favorite conversations and discussions over the last year as we prepare for our 1-year anniversary show next week. Now, we're actually going to revisit a conversation that I had a few months back with Canadian comedy legend Shaun Majumder. Yes, Shaun Majumder, who you may be familiar with CBC. This hour has 22 minutes. Maybe his work back in the day on YTV. I believe he hosted The Breakfast Zone. He also appeared in Harold and Kumar, and he has a small part in Tiger King. Yes, if you watched Tiger King at the beginning of the quarantine, you may have seen Shaun, as I believe they captured footage on a piece that he was doing at the time for one of the shows that he was working on, where he's interviewing Joe Exotic, which was quite the fun Easter egg if you were watching Tiger King and you're familiar with Shaun's work. Shaun at the time was promoting his Hate Tour, which was rolling through the Rose Theatre in Brampton. So we're very honored to have had the opportunity to chat with him. I must say the topics that Shaun addresses or are addressed in the Hate Tour, because I had the opportunity to attend, are very relevant to what's going on today. It really has to do with the ignorance that surrounds racism and just how a lot of people really do not have any filters nowadays. And I think Shaun does a fantastic job in really addressing these issues and really holding people accountable and calling people out. So enjoy this conversation, this little throwback from a few months ago, and then we'll be right back soon after. It is Shaun Majumder is currently joining us. Shaun, thanks so much for making time for New Theory Radio.
It is my pleasure, man. It's great to be involved in anything Peel Region.
And you were saying that you have a Peel Region connection.
Absolutely. So a couple of connections. One being when I moved to Newfoundland, my dad was living in the south. My dad was actually first he was living in Port Credit way back when my parents divorced. I would always come up and visit. Well, I would always end up down in Port Credit. And then when my mom moved to Ontario with me and my sister, we moved to Clarkson. So I was in Clarkson, then I went to Hillside, then I went to Clarkson, played hockey with Clarkson, not high school, but with Clarkson, I played Red. Yeah. And then it was fun, because I also know John Tavares played actually at Clarkson as well, which was I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. When I heard about that later, I was like, oh, I played on the same ice as John Tavares. Oh, I love that. Along with a million other kids.
You're just going to own it. But, you have to own it. That's like me. Yeah. I went to the same high school as Russell Peters. It's like, did you go to at the same time? I'm like, no, but I did go to the same high school.
Did you ever meet his mom?
No, I haven't. I never met Mama Peters, but no, Russell Peters went to Turner Fenton Secondary, and that's where I went. Yep. So that's hilarious, man. That's awesome.
It used to be just J.A. Turner, wasn't it?
It was.
Turned into Turner Fenton.
Then there was like a merger between the two schools.
Very weird. Very weird. Because I only knew it as J.A. Turner. When I would play volleyball, I would play against J.A. Turner.
Really, yeah. It's fascinating because it was J.A. Turner. I forgot what the first name of Fenton was, but then I remember eventually they came together and then they created the first high school campus. So when I was at high school, I used to tell people, "Hey, my high school is cooler than yours because mine's a campus," and they had no idea what that meant. But I ran with it.
Pretty cool, though. That sounds like American style, you know?
It definitely does.
In Brampton.
It definitely does. Another interesting story I wanted to tell you is I saw you perform at Yuck Yucks on Richmond Street. It was my sister Natasha. We were always big fans of you. Like I think seeing you on TV and seeing you do many different things and seeing you on CBC. Like we just had this conversation in the segment before when we were talking about an upcoming Black History Month concert that's taking place at the Rose. But just representation really matters, and I think as a kid. Being someone who was a big fan of just watching TV all the time, seeing someone like you really resonated with us because it felt like we almost knew you because of just who you were and just because of what your last name was. And I remember we went to go check you out. And what I loved about your comedy set was, number one, you obviously talked about your background and talked about your family, but you also talked about this character that you I don't know if it was an alias, but was it Raj? And used to play the sitar song. Was that the bit?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I probably talked about how Raj was born, and Raj kind of came to me through I was actually with my very good friend Chris Clappenson, who was a marketing guy at YTV when I was working there, and he, YTV, some big corporate thing, Chorus Entertainment. They had tickets to. They had I guess it was the Rogers Open, whatever the Open was, the big tennis tournament up at York University. And so we went, and it was like 40 degrees Celsius in the afternoon watching this tennis match. And everybody was like on fire, sweating. And I remember myself and Chris just laughing, going, "Oh my God, what's it like for people in India who do, this color commentary if they're outside and they're doing cricket or something? Like, how hard must it be? It gets so hot." So anyway, and then I would do this character. I was like, "Okay, I think it was I pretended to be golf. It was golf."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, BJ Singh now getting ready to tee off. He hit the last one into the water and." I could use some water right about now. Jokes like that, stupid stuff. But we only did it as an audio thing, and then I remember I did it as a sketch down here in LA with a group. We were just kind of like trying to throw sketches up, and he said, "Dude, we want to see that guy. I want to see what that guy looks like." And then I ended up trying it with the sketch script that we had called the Bob Room, and I just went out and I got all this glycerin and water, and I made them not just sweaty, but like turbo sweaty, like hyperhidrosis level, like
Coolio Gangster's Paradise sweaty.
Yeah, like way over the top with sweat. And anyway, that's what made me laugh. Like this guy who's sweating all the time, and because he's from India and it's just so hot there all the time, he's just internally always there's a combustion engine going on. So anyway, I started doing that character then, and that might be what I was talking about. I'm not sure if I repeated the sketch with the Calcutta Golf Open or anything like that, but yeah, maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, it was something that we totally loved. I remember when you brought it out, it was kind of cool, man. Because again, I think at that time, and I think this wasn't around. Like I had never I think this was way before Russell. I had seen anything to do with Russell. So again, it was just cool to see somebody talk about something that I could relate with. That I wasn't used to, like again, and outside of my parents watching Ion Asia, like in the mornings on Saturdays, like that, you were like the closest thing to someone I could relate to. That was like the same color as me, which was great, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's amazing how definitely Russell was the front runner. He was about 5 years ahead of me doing stand up, and it's funny because when I first started, there would be all these people getting me mixed up with Russell because I was talking a little bit about my brown side, because my dad is from India, he's Bengali, and my mom, she was white, and so they are both no longer with us, but they are But when when I would talk about the brown side, it was stuff that I had just been learning about because I grew up in Newfoundland.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to Ontario and I moved to Mississauga, my dad would take me to some Bengali festival stuff, and I was like, oh my, as a Newfoundlander, I was like, man, this is pretty wild. All these people here doing all these wild things, eating all this crazy food. And I loved it. But I got to know my Indian heritage and my South Asian heritage later in life. And still to this day, I still want, to learn more and go back. And I have lots of family in India. And, it's amazing. But again, it's like, talking about your experience on stage, you do have an impact on, whoever it is, and then it was nice to see all kinds of brown comics starting to come up and speak their truth and not try to fit into something else. It's great. And now the diversity in Toronto's comedy scene is beautiful. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so it's cool to see the evolution.
No, totally. Let's talk about Hate. So this is your new tour. You're bringing it to the Rose Theater. Love Hate, man. Yeah. You gotta love Hate. It's if you don't have haters, you're not doing anything right?
Yeah.
So the show itself is really talking about intolerance and prejudice, and again, you're obviously using your unrelenting humor to bring this to life. This week's show specifically, we are in sort of Black History Month, and I just brought on some artists that are going to be performing at a Black History Month showcase. After this segment, we are doing a segment with Anita Lee from the Canadian Journalists of Color to talk about how there needs to be more diversity in newsrooms. But when it comes to comedy specifically, and to your point that you just brought up around the fact that it's really refreshing in Toronto to see just a plethora of different diverse comics out there that are hitting the circuit, that are getting opportunities via many different outlets. How would you describe sort of the conversations that we're seeing around intolerance and prejudice in the comedy world, especially when it comes to some things that don't involve necessarily racism, but involve cancel culture and some of these other topics that we're seeing bubbling up in the industry?
Yeah, man, that's really complex. The whole thing around, and I will say this, I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to, the current kind of zeitgeist of comedy culture, specifically comedy culture in, like, for example, on college campuses. I mean, I did a show the other night in Hermosa Beach, and these comics were sitting around when I walked in the room, and they were talking about they were doing a show, and they have at this university where they were performing, there was somebody standing right by the sound booth, and they have been given the authority to shut the show down if the comedian talks about anything that was offensive to the university campus.
Wow.
And I was like, that is not real. I couldn't believe that was a real thing. And of course it is. It's much more prevalent than I thought. Now, this is a different conversation than, what my show is about. My show is about the general population hate and what's going on in the world with regards to, the fear of brown, the fear of different, the fear of the other, who perpetuates this, who are the victims, who are the perpetrators, is it all, American skinheads? Nope. There's plenty of Canadians who are freshly at it. There's plenty of Newfoundlanders who have hate in their heart. There's plenty of people out there. Everybody, even myself, I'm messed up. I've got hate in my heart. We all have elements of that. It is human. It's this. It's pretty hard to escape prejudice if you're a human being.
Yeah.
No, so totally. I go into those kinds of themes in my show. But, talking about that, my take on that is simply, I believe stand-up comedy should not have, any kind of, I really don't believe it should have boundaries. I think stand-up comedy is going to offend everybody. Mm-hmm. It's going to, there's a difference between hate speech and propaganda and promoting a point of view that is meant to bring harm to others. And then there's another side to the fact that sometimes comedy has to push boundaries and say things that upset people to bring to light, whether it's the kind of duality of how we think. There's so many levels to comedy. And if you take comedy and stand-up comedy specifically, literally all the time, you're never going to enjoy it, first of all. You're always going to be upset. You're always going to be pissed off. You're always going to be on the defensive. So for me, stand-up should be a place where people can say whatever they want, but they have to understand, too, as a comic, there's going to be consequences.
Yeah.
And so, it is up to the individual artist to decide how far they want to take something. But they should be allowed to go to wherever they want and then know that, it is not all going to work out so well for them if they say something that maybe, whatever it is. Like, yeah, but that's the nature of what it is to be a human being. So, and what it is to be stand-up.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that kind of touches on what you're talking about.
No, 100%. And I think that's crucial because these are conversations I've been having with a lot of comedians on the show is censorship, being able to say something now that's borderline offensive, but then it comes back a few years ago to bite you in the ass, and then people think that you can't be forgiven about it, and I think there's all these extremes. Like I remember really resonating with that Kevin Hart Netflix documentary that came out when I was following the journey that he had when he got removed as the Oscars host and feeling bad for him. Like, dude said something and it's all about comedy, and he did what he could to apologize, and I think people just really wanted him to pour out his heart and soul in every instance that he had. But again, he ended up losing probably one of the biggest gigs of his life because of it. And it's fascinating to see just the trend of where we're seeing comedy go, where people are putting up this shield of offense where they're just about ready to call you out on something as soon as you poke fun at a group of people or even an individual.
Absolutely.
I wonder.
It's challenging. Yeah. And I even talk about, in my act, and I don't think it's popular. I can't tell if it is or what yet, but I have talked about the Kevin Hart situation where, because of social media as being so vicious, and, you can't, there's no forgiveness on social media anymore. There's no, leniency whatsoever. And I use the example of Kevin Hart, and then I say also, like, if, because Ellen DeGeneres came out in support of Kevin Hart, which I thought was amazing, and she kind of said to the LGBTQ community, hey guys, let's give him another chance. And the LGBTQ community destroyed her on Facebook and on social media. It was like, wait a minute, where's compassion? Where's the, is somebody an evil person? Listen, this is not to forgive anybody who makes homophobic comments, but if you make homophobic comments, or if you say anything that's sexist or transphobic or anything, I mean, you either make it a learning lesson, you make it a lesson that, you can grow from, or you hold on to it, in which case, you're probably not going to work much. Or whatever, if you firmly believe that, I don't know what the situation is, but my point is there needs to be some room for compassion. There needs to be some room for forgiveness. And, but there also needs to be accountability for, what you say does matter. Words absolutely matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I'm in all agreements with you, Sean. I think that's important. I think ultimately it's really up to your interpretation, but I think people just need to have better sense of humors, if you ask me.
Just understand that if it's coming from humor versus literal, like direct, humor can be backhanded. I mean, I remember I tweeted this thing. And it comes out in my show. I mean, I talk about all the tweets that I got after I did this one sketch called Beige Power on 22 Minutes. And, the hate tweets I got were amazing. And I'm bringing them and I'm sharing them with you all on stage. But it was just fascinating to see, like, when I started tweeting back at some of these idiots, who were very serious about thinking. They were basically calling me out saying, "Why do you hate white people so much? Why do you want to promote white genocide?"
Oh my God!
Like, you're not serious. You're not serious. So I would tweet things out like, "Hey, everybody, do the backlash from the beige power video tomorrow's, white genocide Christmas crafts and bake sale have to be moved to next week at an undisclosed location." But then there were people who'd see it and be like, "See, I told you." It's like there's no hate and humor don't mix. Basically.
Yeah, they don't. They absolutely don't. And I think that's a great perspective that you bring, and I think that's going to be a huge conversation point maybe coming out of your show to anyone who's in attendance. I think you're going to get a lot of people thinking, which I'm super excited to see. Can we talk about your departure from This Hour Has 22 Minutes? Like, I remember
For sure.
seeing it on social media. I personally, I actually started like watching that show again when I saw you on it, because I thought you were such a great fit, and a lot of your skits actually were being shared online, which was great. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, hey, this show kind of relates to me, because I remember at the time growing up, I never really used to pay attention to it. But then as you kind of get in tune with the news and in tune with things that are happening around you, and you start growing up and become like a homeowner, and you start to vote, you start to pay attention to some of these parodies a lot more.
Right, yeah.
But all of a sudden, like, I remember it hit the news that you were leaving the show, and there was a lot of speculation, and you don't have to go into any of the speculation here, but for you at that time, like, are we happy with your legacy on that show, and do you like where you're progressing now, kind of getting back into the live circuit and getting things going? Was there anything that maybe you would have done differently? Because the thing that's sort of tough is really kind of looking at the Canadian industry as a whole and seeing the opportunities that are available for a lot of talent, and again, you being someone who is a visual minority, it was refreshing to see you on a show that's been predominantly not that for the longest time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, it was. It's funny if you're brown and you're from Newfoundland, you probably have a better chance of being on 22 Minutes, because now Trent McClellan's on there, and he's hilarious, and he's a brown guy from. It was a great story, by the way. I would recommend interviewing him anytime.
Totally,
he's amazing. But anyway, my departure from 22 Minutes is all out there, in terms of the whys, and there's lots of press reports and lots of interviews that I did about it. But, in a nutshell, it was just basically my creative sensibilities and the things that I wanted to do with the show, and with pieces that I had written, were not being kind of, supported, I think, by the showrunner that was working on the show at the time. And I don't know, I just felt like the show was losing its edge a little bit, and I was trying to push, the showrunner to go that direction, but, there was a bit of a power thing there, and, look, if you have an executive producer, who is in charge of the show, they do have the final say. But when you're on a show where you have so much talent, like comedic talent, on the show between the cast and then the writers in the writers' room, who are all working comics, who all have lived comedy, and then the showrunner has never performed comedy, doesn't really, he's not a comedian, he was more of a journalist. I just found that to be, he was a very good producer in terms of running the show. But when it came down to what was funny and what wasn't, I just felt like the door was closed to the input, really, from all the other talent that was on the show, and that was the biggest contention that I had, because I started seeing sketches that were being edited poorly. I felt like material was being left out. I felt like not the right jokes were, being put in the show. And this is my own personal thing. Other people may disagree, but it was just one of those things where I just think we had creative differences, and when it came time for me to renew my contract, the thing was I did not leave. They definitely chose to let me go, because it was weird. I still questioned the reasoning behind it. It was more about the the producer himself probably was like, yeah, no, I don't think Sean should come back. Just because it's more of a headache for me than it is anything else.
Oh, wow.
You know, but my intention was to make the show better, to make the show funnier, to make the show more relevant, you know. And anyway, it kind of interferes, and so be it. But you know, I regarding my legacy on the show, I've loved the show, and it truly is a beautiful place to work, because I mean, you've got, you know, you get to work out all your skills on a show like that. You get to be a writer, you get to be a performer, you get to be an actor, you get to be an editor. You get to do everything. And like as a comedian, it's amazing. It's like going to university. You do all these different courses. It's incredible. So and it's a show that has had a huge impact on Canadian culture.
Yeah.
And I you know, so I've always been honored. And I wish the show lasts forever, and you know, people will come and go. And remember, it is just entertainment. You know what I mean? Like in the big picture. Now they got a daughter too. It's like, oh, dude, what really matters in life? You know. So it was an amazing run. I'm so thankful to be on the show. And I will say this: for those of you who really want to get the true answers, you come to my show in Brampton, because I will be interviewing myself. I'm Skyping myself in, and Sean's going to answer all of my tough questions about what really went down.
Big thanks to Sean Majumder for joining us a few months back, and we are going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more New Theory Radio here on News Talk Saga 960.
Theory Radio.
Welcome back to New Theory Radio, here live on News Talk Saga 960 AM. My name is Nav Nanwa, I am your host, and this is the show where we theorize on all things current affairs, pop culture, and everyday life. It is our special best of edition of New Theory Radio. We are celebrating 1 year here on News Talk Saga 960 AM next week. And to celebrate that this week, we are looking back at some of our favorite conversations and discussions from the past 12 months. This next one that I want to profile is quite relevant to a lot of the issues that we saw come up over the last few days when it comes to injustice and racism and just plain ignorance when it comes to community and political leaders. And it is a conversation that I had with two good friends of mine, Poonam Singh and Jesse Crown, from last July, so almost a year ago. And it was when Donald Trump had tweeted out to 4 congresswomen to go back to their country if they weren't happy with the way things were being done in the U.S. And that actually sparked a lot of conversation around systemic racism, around prejudice, around just the insensitivity that exists amongst political leaders when it comes to them having social media at their disposal and being able to simply blurt out statements without really thinking about them. And now we're seeing in the news the interesting relationship that Donald Trump is having with social media at the current moment. So in this conversation, my good friends Poonam and Jesse, who just to provide some background, I actually got my radio media start with these two individuals at a station called Nutch Radio back in 2012, which was responsible for playing South Asian music over the internet. If you ask me, was definitely ahead of its time. And again, I really enjoyed having this throwback of a conversation with Jesse and Poonam, and I look forward to bringing them back for future episodes. But in this conversation, we discussed the tweet. And then we discussed the role of racism, not only in the U.S., but in Canada. And then there's also a conversation, because at the time we were gearing up for the Canadian federal election. There's also a conversation around a lot of the local issues that we're seeing and just what people can do to stand up against oppression and stand up against injustice and racism, which is definitely relevant today. So enjoy this conversation.
So Donald Trump does this obnoxious tweet to ACO, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, and Rashida Tlaib. I'm totally butchering her name. But anyways, two awesome four congresswomen. Pretty much tell them to go back to their country because all four of them are very vocal regarding how the Trump administration's been running. And I would say when Trump released this tweet, obviously there was a lot of backlash to it. It seems like he's doubled down on this tweet too. Doesn't really care so much for the backlash that he's receiving based on the remarks. But what I find interesting is it's kind of sparked this debate within the U.S. regarding the whole phrase around going back to your country. And then what I feel like people aren't really paying attention is that this also is, I would say, somewhat prevalent within here in Canada, because I think since the Trump administration in the U.S. has become empowered, you've seen a lot of this trickle down here within Canada. And I wanted to start off and get both your theories on this phrase and just how it makes you feel, because I don't know, have any of you ever been told to go back to your country when you were growing up? Maybe Jesse will begin with you.
Sure. I was going to say begin with Poonam, but that's okay. I guess when we're talking about this subject, you have to understand that, Trump and his ability to command attention and get in front of the cameras or get in front of an audience, he's really good at that. Mm-hmm. So, whatever message, whether it's positive or negative, he can run with it. And this is another prime example of something that, he really doesn't think before he speaks. And I think that is a lot of people in politics in and around North America, even in Europe. I was listening to Fareed Zakaria today on CNN, and he was talking to the new Prime Minister of Greece, and he was making some comments about Trump. But, at the same time, he was watching what he was saying with Trump, because he's a world leader at the end of the day. Your countries, your nations still have to work together. So when Trump is speaking, he's not thinking like that. Yeah. He's not thinking about his partnerships with other nations, his effect that his words have on people. And so, this phrase is something that, many, I don't want to say conservatives, but I'll say many people on the right spectrum in the political arena will say it's being taken out of context. Whatever the case is we want, especially in Canada, we're trying to create an inclusive environment, right? And many people, after that comment was made about go back to your country, or after that whole, tweet or series of events occurred, Trudeau came out saying, that's not how
we do things in Canada.
That's right. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Whatever he said, even people started bashing Trudeau to say, hey, listen, this kind of rhetoric exists here in Canada as well. Yeah. And so, I'm not going to sit here and talk to you about what, Americans think, because I'm not from America. Yeah. Born and raised in this country. Does it exist here? Sure, there are examples, and you can talk to many people even before me that, were the first person of color in their class or in their school. And, being told by, older classmates or older people to go back to your country, it was pure ignorance. I hope today in 2019 in middle schools across this province that kids of color, kids who look different, aren't being told to go back to their country. But I will tell you that, during my era, during people before me, their era, it did exist. Mm-hmm. And those are real life experiences that you really have to value, and you really have to listen to people. And so the Canadian experience, and it's something I feel comfortable talking about, is yes, when I was growing up, it happened. Did it happen frequently? Did it happen very often? No, but it did happen. It's an experience that has made me the person who I am today, right? It didn't bring me down in any shape, way, or form. It made me even stronger, right?
And that's what makes it so astonishing, is the fact that people that are being told to go back to their country, for the most part, are people that have been born that have been born in North America. Yeah. So it just really makes it ignorant when you tell someone to do that.
My initial response to something like that would, this is my country. Yeah. And then my other response in my head that I don't say is, well, technically, we're all invading land. Mm-hmm. If we can talk about, Aboriginal issues here in Canada, you speak to an elder in their community, they'll spit facts to you. They'll tell you that we are all actually invading their land, and with this, we should all go back to our home, right? And so we really have to, educate ourselves. And I guess that's my message to Canadians and to the listeners on this show today is, yes, this has occurred. Yes, we should be deeply rooted in invested into, discouraging this type of behavior. But at the same time, let's all educate ourselves, right? Let's all understand what some of the issues are, and how ignorance is still very active today. If you talk to people that are very heavily involved in Black Lives Matter, or who are very heavily involved with, human rights movements, the Ontario Human Rights is going to put out a report very soon in the fall about racial discrimination and how it still exists in various forms of government in the city of Toronto and the province of Ontario. Educate yourselves, learn what the issues are, and then speak on those issues. Don't just speak on the issues because you heard it from somebody else or you read a tweet, because now you think that you're informed. And this is the danger of social media here.
Oh, it is.
Is the character restriction still 140 words?
No, it's 280, right?
Yeah.
It's
280?
Yeah.
Oh, it's double now. Okay, so you get a little bit more, knowledge.
You get full paragraphs now.
That's right. But
you have more time to type out what you feel and think.
But you need to do your due diligence. Read more than just a tweet. Start reading, and I give kudos to a lot of people that are advocating for, making an inclusive Canada, or, talking about human rights. Read those links that they post in their tweets,
right?
Because those are the actual evidence-based. That's the actual evidence-based research that has information that you can then, kind of base your judgment around, or your opinion around.
Poonam, what are your thoughts?
I think the phrase itself is one. It's a tactic for bullies. Like at the end of the day, it's like that schoolyard mentality. It's like, okay, let me say something about you physical, or not what the real issue is. So here's an example. I remember here, speaking of Twitter, I think it was another congresswoman, but I might be wrong, but she was in the store, she was in the express lane, and a white male told, I guess she had too many items in her hand, and she was in the express lane with 10 items, and he's like, my God, you lazy son of a whatever.
Oh, wow.
And then he said, why don't you go back to where you came from? Now, the issue there is, you just have too many items in your hand, right? So what's the need for the latter? Yeah,
exactly. So unnecessary,
right? But it speaks to people's insecurity, because they don't have anything smart to say to somebody, to say to them, hey, you have too many items in your hand, you need to leave the line. But this person felt entitled to say, go back to where you came from, which one is a tactic for bullies. Two, I think it's xenophobic, racist, and it promotes this false sense of nationalism, where this guy thinks, these are my borders. You can't cross my borders. My borders are defined by people that look like me, and they don't look like you. Even if you're naturalized, right? Like so we all think we belong somewhere, and that somewhere are man-made borders. So it's weird. Like, even if I'm a naturalized Canadian, does that give someone the right to say to me, go back to where you came from?
No, I know, it's weird. And
it's weird.
Even because Canada obviously promotes a lot of immigration and getting people here to start a new life. I remember when the Syrian refugees started to come over here, and when I was covering this on Rogers TV, we would have people call in that would say, oh, they're going to take all my jobs, like, why can't they just stay in their country?
Yeah.
And even though the concern there is the fact that their opportunities were going to limit, it was also ignorant on their end to even say that they should go back to their country, not knowing that their country, there's a reason why they're fleeing. Right? And I don't know, like that's what I find very intriguing here is, number one, you got the one side where it's people are being told to go back to their country when they're not originally from there, which makes this funny. But then you have another one where people are just not being sympathetic to the reasons why people are here to start a new world, start a new life.
So when you look at American politics, right, Obama, before Trump, you had Obama. Obama was so successful in his initial campaign is because he united people. He talked about unity, right? Trump, in his own right, and I'm not saying it's the way to go, but from a PR perspective, from a marketing perspective, from a re-election perspective, he's uniting a certain segment of the population in and around this message. And is it effective? From a PR standpoint, of course it is, right? But from a human standpoint, from a respect standpoint, from the American dream standpoint, it's not. Like, that is something that it's not what Americans are about. And there's a clear difference between his leadership style and, other conservative leadership. So other conservative leadership styles. So if you look at John McCain before Donald Trump, when John McCain was dealing with a heckler in one of his campaign rallies, and they said something about about Obama that was inaccurate, he stopped the lady and he said, "No, ma'am, that's not true." Right? You don't see Trump doing that. And although Trump has come on TV to say, I quickly changed the topic, but you didn't address the topic. And that's the issue here, right? Silence when it comes to discrimination, when it comes to ignorance, silence doesn't help the cause either. So talking about it, I think, is very healthy. And I'm glad people are in and around. I'm glad we're having these kinds of conversations today, because you need people's perspectives and opinions on, why this impacts them and how it impacts them, because you need people to speak about their inequalities and the differences that they've faced, because you'll make the connection that way. We've all faced these kinds of discrimination or inequalities.
Sorry. Just to your point, I just pulled this up because I want to be all facts about this during this show. I don't want to
facts only.
Yeah, facts only. So the whole, how you're talking about the whole unity premise that Obama ran on, and with Trump, like, according to this study that was done just recently, right, back in March, and it was done out of the University of North Texas, hate crimes reportedly jumped by 226% in counties that hosted Trump campaign rallies.
Yep.
That's insane.
Yeah. 226%. So if anyone thinks that his words don't have consequences,
oh, they definitely do.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, like I just pulled up this article courtesy of CNN, and it was actually came out yesterday, and talks about how the U.S. federal government actually found the phrase "go back to your country" to be considered discriminatory in cases.
Right.
And apparently, it's mainly like the clause can be used, predominantly against Trump if he's like the employer of the 4 congresswomen that he used the phrase towards, but he's not. But it's still considered discriminatory in a sense based on their current guidelines under the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But I wanted to ask you, like, what should the repercussions be? Because there's all like. I'm sorry, like, I think Trump on Twitter has been a bit of a gong show since he's been elected, even before that. And is enough? Like, is this enough to finally do something about it? Because there were a lot of Republicans that were very much against what he had said as well.
Yeah, but nobody willing, like I said, I'm going to use my John McCain example again. Nobody willing to actually say, no, stop it, that's not how we should act. Like, I think they tried to interview Mitt Romney, and he
just danced around it?
Yeah, he denounced it, and he said, no, he didn't use the words, that's wrong, but he didn't fully address it. And so, you need to confront the issues. Mm-hmm. And that's the significant difference, I think, in when you look at America and then you look at Canada, confronting issues. Mm-hmm. And whether it's effective or not, but we have a lot of strategies and policies in Canada that confront issues like black racism. Mm-hmm. And so governments, whether you stand on the left side or the right side or in the middle of the political spectrum, that is an effective government response. It's confronting the issues in a respectful way, in a way that is based on evidence, on studies from universities, for example, the one that you pulled up in Texas, because that's how you create legitimacy. Right? You can make all the claims you want. And there's a lot of fact checkers. Anytime Trump is talking or tweeting, people are fact checking what he's saying.
Yeah, they are.
Right? And they find that he's lying a majority of the time. But imagine if he spoke with evidence-based, proof, if he brought up statistics, we wouldn't have so much of a problem.
Yeah.
Then the concern would be how did we let this issue grow as much as it has, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I guess my recommendation is when you're talking about racism, when we're talking about discrimination and what should happen next, should there be a commission? But how much public trust has been lost for the American people and in the government system there?
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Putum, because I know you're a big hip-hop fan just like me, is A$AP Rocky's currently being detained in a Swedish jail because of some incident that had taken place with a street fight. Apparently he was out protecting 2 girls that were getting harassed by 2 Swedish people. And he's currently being detained in a jail in Sweden, and there's a lot of people that want him to come out and come back home here. We'll come back to the U.S. And Donald Trump tweets later in the week that he just got off the phone with Kanye West and that he's going to call the Swedish Prime Minister and asked for A$AP Rocky's release. Kind of interesting for people, kind of polarizing, because number one, I find Kanye's relationship with Trump to always be polarizing, but then for someone like A$AP Rocky to be mentioned in a Trump tweet,
after what Trump had said earlier about those 4 congresswomen, do you think that's just a tactic for him to sort of defer any of the negative attention he was getting and try to be looked upon in a good light to try to get A$AP Rocky out?
100%. I think because of the backlash of his racist tweets, when did the racist tweets come out?
They came out, I think, about a week ago.
A week ago, okay,
so,
and so his tweet about A$AP Rocky was just less than 48 hours ago.
It was like Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I definitely a tactic to make sure that his eyes are not on his racist tweets anymore. And I don't know how he gets himself in these situations where he can. Oh man, he can just divert the attention completely to now focusing on A$AP Rocky. Whether he does something, that's one question. I don't even know if A$AP Rocky would even appreciate the president, chiming in all this. We don't know where A$AP Rocky stands on a political level. He's actually gone on record saying he doesn't like to talk about politics.
But outside of Kanye, majority of the hip hop community has been pretty vocal. So you would assume that maybe he is on sort of that side of the spectrum. But still, it's, I don't know. Does his opinion change when he gets out of jail?
Ooh, someone would have to ask A$AP that.
Well,
right? Yeah.
Well, I think the call might have been made because I saw some things on Twitter where apparently Sweden jail is still keeping A$AP Rocky
for another week. Yeah, because the prosecution says they need more time to deliberate the evidence.
Yeah,
which is not true. They just want to make a point.
So maybe it didn't work.
Maybe not. No, I don't think. I think what people said this about anybody else. I was listening to another podcast where they were also detained in Sweden as well. Is that they just make you do the grunt work. So they just try to teach you a lesson. So because they don't want a certain type of people in their country.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to what Jesse was saying earlier. Is that Trump is, when it comes to politics and being bright, no. Where he is bright is when it comes to PR stunts. And this is one of his biggest PR stunts right after his racist tweet is forget what I said about the 4 congresswomen. I'm going to help. I'm in talks with the Swedish government to make sure that we can get A$AP Rocky out. Okay.
Yeah. So such a deterrent for sure.
Yeah.
Jesse, what are your thoughts on that strategy?
So this kind of fundamentally goes back to the basic principles of marketing and PR, right? Let's move away from the message that really just got got thrown under the bus. People didn't like it, and let's change the discussion. And so we see this in Ontario. We've seen this in Ontario for quite some time now. The last couple of months, the Doug Ford administration canceling funding, making cuts, and then doing something 180 to say, hey, we're also doing this. Mm-hmm. It's, forget about it, people. We've moved on. And so that's why I'm encouraging people, start reading into this. The election, the federal election is coming up here in Canada. And I encourage voters, whether you're conservative, whether you're liberal, whether you're NDP, Green Party, the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier, whatever you align with, just make sure you know that party's platform and you know what those people are about. And then that way, when issues do arise like this, you can call people out on, hey, that doesn't align with what you said. And, obviously we're, our democratic system, is set up in a way where that kind of comes after the fact for many of us in these situations where leaders say one thing and then when they get in a position of power, they do things a different way. And how do we hold people accountable to their word and what they said? That's extremely difficult, but it's also about, the civic participation and civic empowerment. How do we get people more involved at the local level? And, Brampton, Mississauga areas here in Etobicoke do a great job of high levels of civic participation and making sure people are informed about what's happening, whether it's at the local level, the provincial level, or the federal level. And that's all you can really ask of people. As long as they're, encouraged, invested, and interested in politics, you're going to see a bright future here in Canada. With Trump, when was the last time you heard stories about Obama fielding calls from from hip hop artists or Bill Clinton fielding calls?
Apparently Jay-Z had Obama on text. That's what I heard.
But that was for him to.
It was like a song lyric.
Oh no! Oh yeah, but
okay. But did that story ever come out in real time?
No,
right?
That was
after the fact, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the way Obama was. He was a classy guy like that. And also, it's a difference between Jay-Z and Kanye this way too, right? Yeah. Jay-Z does a lot of things discreetly.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, I'm not a big Jay-Z fan, but the man is a boss.
Oh, he is,
right?
He is.
And there's a huge difference between someone like Jay-Z and someone like Kanye and their response and their reaction. Jay-Z's not looking for a reaction, right? He puts things out and he lets people fly with it, where Kanye wants the reaction.
I'm actually waiting for the day that, like, I don't know, Drake reaches out to Premier Trudeau to make some power move.
So, I was just telling Poonam this, at the end of the day, OVO is coming up.
It is.
Yeah. And a lot of people are speculating, hey, who's going to be on the bill? Kendrick could come.
Don't say it, Jess. Don't say it.
Meek Mill, maybe, right? And
what is he going to say?
Well, the conversation Poonam and I were having was, I don't Drake could possibly pick up the phone to Trudeau and say, hey, we need to get Meek Mill across the border. And at the end of the day, people, because of what they saw during the Raptors parade, Drake was on the same stage as Prime Minister Trudeau.
Yeah.
Maybe he has that connection. Maybe he has that link.
Well, there was that one year he brought Lil Wayne, and Lil Wayne was like fresh out of jail, and now people were surprised about that too. It always comes back to OVO Fest. Maybe because we're giving away OVO Fest Day 1 tickets. If you want more details, we did provide some earlier details at the beginning of the show. We'll provide more details at the end. But
can I enter this contest?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone's available to enter, and I'll provide more details later.
Good.
But I want to touch on before we move on and change topics, I do want to talk about the upcoming federal election. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of this racial undertone taking place with the upcoming election that's happening in October.
Yep.
There's people talking about how the NDP might lose a lot of people in Quebec because of just some of the racial tension there and just their feedback towards Jagmeet Singh. We've seen Andrew Scheer show up with interesting people that are very alt-right. The People's Party of Canada, obviously, is something that's been stirring up and getting quite the following. Do you foresee any of this type of go back to your country-esque messaging or behavior becoming more and more apparent as we enter this Canadian election in October? And anybody can take it.
Yeah, so I'll be very quickly on this, and then if you want to jump in. So what resonates with people is essentially what this election is about, right? Is this election about the food guide and how the food guide has changed? Is this election about the child tax benefit that's come in,
just
right?
Be vegetarian.
Hey, Beyond Meat. I haven't tried it myself, but very popular. So what is at the essence and what is at the core of this federal election? And that is all determined by the leaders and the political strategists on what message resonates the most with people. When they kind of put it out, how many people are actually biting on, hey, this is an issue and we want to make this an issue. So a lot of these alt-right groups, a lot of these groups that are talking about free speech and public speech, at the end of the day, is that what all of Canada thinks? And you really have to understand the landscape of elections and voting here. In Canada, elections are won in two places: Ontario and BC, right? And obviously, the NDP in the past have seen some success because they were able to win in Quebec. But coming around this time around, yes, Quebec is still at play. Quebec has their policies in place that are very discriminatory against people who wear religious items of significance. Is that a big enough for all of Canada? Is that a big enough issue for all of Canada, though? Right? Because I just told you that elections are won in Ontario or BC, right? Yeah. And so it's going to be very interesting to see. But whatever message resonates with people, I think is that and whoever is able to really get a stronghold on that message and take it and run with it, that's the party that's going to win here.
But does it concern you? I mean, Poonam will ask you, does it concern you that you are seeing race become more and more of a factor in the way Canadians are thinking? We saw a lot of this last year in both the provincial and municipal elections. Obviously, you have all these other fringe parties that are showing up, that are catching steam, that are, allowing people to be more vocal regarding how they really feel. What's your thoughts on that?
So you asked whether it's concerning, racial tensions, right? Really, at the core of it. I think we've been there, we're still there, and I think it's still going to be there. And I think nothing is more indicative of that than Bill 21 right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and it just passed Quebec Supreme Court, which is already scary enough. So, and whether it makes it to Supreme Court of Canada, like I have more faith in the Supreme Court of Canada, but the fact that has already passed, provincial court, Supreme Court is already alarming enough. And it just goes to show, I'm going to make this full circle, the whole go back to where you came from. It's what people have been thinking, and now that they get to put it on a piece of paper, I feel already defeated. Yeah. Whether that's a Canadian issue because we're dealing with only Quebec at the moment, I think it's also alarming when you don't see Andrew Scheer, Jagmeet Singh, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau when they don't speak immediately after when these motions get passed. I think that's also alarming.
It is.
I was waiting. I was waiting seconds when this happened, and nobody spoke a word. And so, for me, people's rights are not being protected, and if you're not even vocal about that, then what's happening in this country then?
Yeah. No, and it does go back to human rights because, again, Canada being the inclusive country that we've grown to love, obviously being the kids of immigrants that came over to Canada for a new life, it's sad to see just how backwards some of this thinking is.
Yeah, and that's why I think every for the narrative in the States was always, whereas in Canada's multicultural, the States is a melting pot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That narrative is not working for them ever since Trump came in power. So we could tomorrow have our own Trump too. Right?
It's definitely possible.
It's possible.
Well, a lot of people say that, Premier Ford is a junior size version, but there are many similarities between those two leaders. Whether it's far extreme opposite or very similar ideologies and tactics, I kind of take this back to what resonates most with that mass population.
Yeah.
And so they put out very simplistic messages, very simple language ads that, the average person will say, you know what? I think that. I don't want to say that, and I agree with what I'm hearing on TV. Here is a $10 donation to whatever party has just put that out.
Yeah.
And it's going to be very interesting to see how Ontario, when the Ontario elections happen again, how voters in Ontario vote in and around, what they've just witnessed for the last 4 years, and then how they want to move forward. Because everybody was tired of the Win Liberals. Are they going to be tired of the Ford Conservatives, right? And so the pendulum needs to shift, and it will shift. It's only natural. It happens. And I'm going to be, I'm going to be repetitive here, but it's all that resonates with the majority of people. It may not reflect everybody, right? It may not be what everybody agrees with, but everybody, it's all about the majority. It's what the majority says, and there needs to be electoral reform here in Canada, and this is really boring to speak about, but it's a federal election promise that Trudeau hasn't acted upon, right? And who's taking him to account to this, right? And so we have to understand, and I'll be very transparent here. I'm a liberal. Right, I'm a red liberal. My father was a huge
red Raptors jersey.
Yeah, my father was a huge Chrétien fan. Before that, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He's the reason why our family is here. We came in the early 60s, right? But at the end of the day, who holds these politicians accountable when they talk about, hey, I'm going to relook at or reevaluate electoral reform in this country, and then 3 years into being prime minister, you haven't done anything to address it. You know who does it? Is by voting them again. So the power is in the voters, and I just want to remind people of that. You have the power here. Yes, people have the money, and the money can talk, and the money can give you campaigns, but listen, the ballots are what counts here. And just make sure your voice is counted, and get out there and be active in civic participation. I can't be more straightforward than that, right? Go to your local community meetings, talk about issues at a local level, and if they're not local issues, figure out how they can get escalated to the more appropriate levels of government.
We are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back with more New Theory Radio here on News Talk Saga 960 AM.
Theory Radio.
And we are back here on New Theory Radio, here live on News Talk Saga 960 AM. My name is Nav Nanwa. I'm your host, and this is the show where we theorize on all things current affairs, pop culture, and everyday life. It is no secret that protective masks are becoming quite the norm nowadays with the COVID-19 pandemic. I actually had someone tell me that the protective mask is going to be as essential as getting even a pair of sunglasses. And that's what's going to be the norm almost moving forward. But an interesting initiative that's truly making a difference within the protective mask space is this unique collaboration between Now Creative Group and a company called Pure Filters. And they have officially announced the launch of MaskWell, which builds reusable masks that feature high efficiency replaceable filters to help keep you healthy during uncertain times. And joining me to talk about this, I have two members of part of this awesome collaboration. I have Nader Chaudhry as well as April Hussein here joining me on New Theory Radio to talk about this. Nader and April, thanks so much for coming through New Theory Radio.
Thanks for having us. We're super excited.
Great
and honestly, I love this. Like I mentioned, getting a mask is just becoming more and more of a thing nowadays. You know, you're starting to see even specific retail locations all across the world not letting people enter unless they're wearing a mask. So it's becoming more and more the go-to protective measure as we try to navigate through this COVID-19 world. But, you know, I'd love to understand in this world where everyone's sort of pivoting their ideas. April, maybe we'll begin with you. How did MaskWell really come about?
Yeah, 100%. So it came about as a very simple collaboration between Nader at Pure Filters and then my team here at Now Creative Group. What's really cool is we actually met at our co-working space, which you've seen a couple times, Nav, and we met about a year and a half ago. Started off super simple, literally offered Nader a fork in the kitchen, and it's been really awesome to see how having such an awesome community here in Toronto can make a huge difference, even during a pandemic. It's been really cool to just talk with them and brainstorm ideas and look at how we can solve problems. So Nader approached us with a very simple problem that he wanted to address, and that was to support people by providing them with protection during the global pandemic, but also to build awareness, right, and education too about why it's so important to protect yourself. Nader has an awesome background in air filtration. Him and his partner Jay are super passionate about quality lifestyles. And just living a really healthy lifestyle, being super conscious about the environments that you're living in. And then for us at Now Creative Group, we're so passionate about building our community, doing as much as we can from a social impact perspective, just like the Pure Filters team. So it was a super natural collaboration, and it just made a lot of sense. And it was like a blitz. Like as soon as we started, everything happened so fast. But Nader, you can talk a little bit about how we came to be too. I think your perspective will be super interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you pretty much told most of the story there, but prior to that, all that happening, so we at Pure Filters, we have all kinds of filters for the home, air, water, all different kinds. And when this whole pandemic started and people started getting pretty worried about what they're breathing, and obviously the whole COVID-19 thing really being a respiratory disease, I came to realize that one of the types of filters that we have, which is a MERV 13, which is like an efficiency rating, it actually was capable of capturing particulates that were small enough and that contained that could contain virus carriers. And so these filters were capable of capturing those. So at the same time, I obviously, being a natural entrepreneur, I looked around me and try to see where the opportunities were, and also what problems needed to be solved and where I could bring value. And so masks were something that I saw had become big in Asia in 2009 or so, after the whole H1N1 pandemic that was huge over there. And to this day, masks are really part of the lifestyle there now, right? Pandemic or not, people wear it to go out in public. And honestly, it's almost as much of fashion and pop culture as it is a function. And so I saw all that happening. And here at home and in Europe, North America, we were seeing people getting really, really concerned about what are they breathing when they go out in public and when they're around other members of the public. And I thought naturally that people are going to be moving towards wearing masks. And at the time, the CDC was saying, no, don't wear masks. But obviously that kind of thing has changed, and masks are definitely recommended now. And so I thought, okay, what can I do here using my skills and my unique place in running a business like Pure Filters? And I figured that I could put this filter into a mask, a reusable mask, and put it all together so that when people are wearing the mask, I mean, it's really functional. Not only is it protecting people from spreading the virus, from them to other people, but also from other people to them by using that filter that's in between, it's inside of the mask. And so that's kind of how the concept came to be. We toyed with a bunch of different concepts, and we even reached out to a bunch of different mask companies. But after a while, the whole concept of Maskable was born, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and it's truly fascinating to kind of see how you both were able to stumble upon this idea and act so quickly. Because I remember, to your point, now people were asking the CDC, people were even asking our Canadian health system, hey, should I be wearing a mask when I go outside? And there was all this talk around, maybe not, maybe it's not really necessary, yada, yada, yada. All of a sudden, fast forward a few weeks after, now it's becoming the norm. Like, people are really starting to embrace this lifestyle of wearing a mask when they go outside to do their groceries or go for a walk, or if they know they're going to be in a crowded area, having that mask on to be protected. And the one thing that really stood out was almost like these three value propositions that you guys have laid out. The fact that it's locally designed, it's a very sleek looking mask. So again, I think part of the turnoff is if you're wearing one of those, one of those masks that look very medical, it looks somewhat intimidating. Like it has that look and feel that, maybe someone is sick, or maybe someone is, I don't know, like maybe the situation is as dire as it truly is. But I think with your locally designed, with the fact that it's reusable, the fact that, you're able to identify a core competency that you had within Pure Filters with the high efficiency MERV 13 filters. And I'm glad you explained what that was, because that was one of my questions. It looks fantastic. Like, this is something that I think looks very stylish, but I love the overall message behind it. And there is a community aspect to this as well. So maybe Nader, maybe explain what is the community angle here when it comes to selling these masks?
Okay, yeah, definitely. So the community angle is actually a huge part of Maskable. So what we wanted to do is we want to be able to contribute not only to the general public, but also the frontline workers who need PPE. So 10% of all revenues, not profits, but revenues of all sales go towards a organization that we support called the Homefront. And the Homefront is tasked with providing PPE to all frontline workers. And so obviously PPE has been personal protective equipment, has been difficult for a lot of organizations to get their hands on, obviously because of the demand being so high and supply being hard to come about. So this organization, they pool money together, and they have the supply chain set up to provide that. And so we donate 10% of all revenues to that organization. So that's a huge part for us. That's one of the main reasons we really wanted to start this business as well.
The one thing that I really enjoy about this initiative, or that I really appreciate, is truly the fact that the mask itself has a lot of quality elements to it. Number one, the fact that it is breathable. And I think that was a huge concern when it came to wearing a mask in general, was if you put on a cotton mask, it may not give you the full protection compared to one of those medical masks. But I think a lot of people were also concerned about almost the behavior of wearing a mask and almost feeling enclosed and not being able to breathe properly. I know one of the issues I have with wearing a mask and being someone who wears glasses is that my glasses do fog up. So, ideally I can't wear a mask while I drive. Like, I have to take it off because I don't want my vision to get blurred. But there seems to be a lot of confidence regarding the value that you guys are providing with Maskwell. How important was it to really differentiate yourselves versus some of the notions that exist regarding protective masks?
Yeah, it was extremely important. Right off the bat, we there were so many individuals selling masks, so many organizations selling masks. And for us, it was really important to figure out, okay, what does the community actually need? What is something that we have access to that other organizations might not have access to? And for us, of course, that was the filters, right? But also our background in design and understanding what matters to people. I think that's what a lot of brands weren't considering. I think they were coming out with some really, intricate designs, as you mentioned, things that, you kind of have to think twice about wearing. And that's not the point of this, right? The point of this is that it needs to be something super simple, something that's a part of what you're already wearing, where it's a no-brainer. And that's kind of what really drove us. We wanted to find a way to make it something that's super simple and something that people don't even have to think about before heading out of the house, right? Because that's really where we see this going. And we did talk already about how this is going to be the new normal. And as we already all know, there's so many places in the world where you have to, like, you have no choice but to wear these masks. And we want to support as much as we can with building that awareness and keeping the community informed about some of these, recommendations, but what might soon become the norm and the must too.
Yeah, and just to add to your point here, Bill, you hit the nail on the head. But like, to summarize it, I think you could say that fashion meets function, right? It's got to look good, but it's got to look good and feel good, but it's also got to provide that added element of filtration.
Exactly.
Nader, do you want to explain maybe the material of the mask? Because again, I think we're talking about it's very similar to what I guess a Nike tech fleece material. Yeah,
exactly. So the outside of the mask is very similar to a Nike tech fleece material, which is like, for those of you who don't know, it's Nike tech fleeces. They're like $150 sweatpants, basically. Right?
But you need a pair. You have to have a pair.
Yeah, they're super comfy, worth every penny if you ask me. But they're pricey. It's the material, right? It's really soft, but it's breathable. It's not particularly hot. It's just nice. It's just better. So that's the outside, and it feels really good to the touch. But the inside is even better. It's got a micro polyester material around the face, which touches your cheeks and your mouth and all that. And that material is what houses the filter inside of it. That material, when it's on your skin, feels like the nicest basketball shorts you ever wore, right?
Nice.
It's just so light. It's so breathable. And when you're outside in humid heat the way it was a couple of days ago, it's like 30, 40 degrees even. This is a mask that you'll be able to wear out and about because it is breathable. It does feel pretty good, but you have the confidence of knowing that you've got that filter in between there. So, air is passing through it, but it's also being filtered as well.
Is there any type of like if somebody owns a mask, like what is the proper etiquette in regards to wearing the mask, but then also coming home and making sure that it's clean and is not affected with anything that may have come into contact with it as someone was going about their day? And I love the fact that with every purchase of a Maskwell mask, there is 4 insertable filters. There's like an entire kit that comes with the entire package. But what is the proper etiquette when it comes to wearing a mask and ensuring that it's staying clean at all times?
Well, first of all, we include 10 filters actually with every kit. But the proper etiquette is well, you should wash the mask, and it's designed to be reusable, right? So you should come home, take out the filter, toss it out. That's disposable. And with Maskwell, you can actually sign up for a subscription program, and we'll just deliver enough filters for the month every month, right? So toss out the filter, put the mask in a washing machine or wash it by hand, hang it up to dry, and in a few hours it's good to go again. You want to be somewhat careful with the mask. You don't want to touch it too much while you're wearing it because you don't know, what you've touched outside with your hands. Obviously, you want to avoid that cross-contamination. But outside of that, it's just like wearing regular clothes. You come home, you wash them, and you put it back on, you're clean again. It's pretty much like that. So yeah, just maintain the same level of hygiene that you normally would with your clothing, and that's pretty much it.
And I wanted to mention just a couple things super quickly. Is we actually recently decided to increase it to 10 filters, purely based on the fact that we realized people are needing to go out more often. So that was a decision that we made based on people's typical activity right now. But we also actually include a postcard in all of the welcome kits that give people details about how exactly they should use the mask. We wanted to make sure that everyone was equipped with that, so we make sure it's very clearly laid out in the packages.
That's awesome, because you are starting to see a lot of big retailers take excess material and creating these masks, and obviously it's brilliant because they're not disposing of excess material, and they're actually using it for some good. But I think there's still an education process around wearing a mask and why it's important and what it is to truly clean it. Like, you might have someone, like, again, normal behavior when you're wearing a cotton t-shirt, there's probably some people that don't clean it after every wear, that probably clean it after a couple wears because they probably don't see the need to, right? And I think this pandemic has really taught us regarding proper hygiene. And I think, if you are investing in a cotton mask that's on your face at all times, there is some things you need to take into account to fully get protected. I truly love this initiative. I commend the entire teams, both at Pure Filters and Now, for bringing this forward. I think it's truly awesome. And what's actually cool is you guys have a special pre-order deal going on. And Nader or April, feel free to shed light on what that consists of and how people can learn more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to getmaskable.com, you'll find all the information you need. And if you simply type in 10 off at the checkout, you'll get 10% off, which is awesome. But we are also working on releasing newer designs over the next couple of months, so stay tuned for that. But we're launching really exciting campaigns all the time. We have our small business giveaway happening right now, where all we're asking you to do is just shout out some small businesses in the GTA that currently need masks and are currently operating. And we're just committing to a certain number that we will donate to them, because we just want them to be as safe as possible as they're slowly transitioning into reopening their establishments, right? Yeah, just stay tuned on social at Get Maskwell, and that's where we update our community and everyone on what we're up to.
Yeah, these are super cool. I urge everyone to go check it out. We'll provide all the details on our socials as well as our podcast description on Tuesday. But yes, go support Maxwell. They're doing amazing work. I'm loving the designs. I really dig the heather and pink one. That one's not bad, actually.
I'm excited about that one too.
I might have to talk to you guys about that one for my wife. But yeah, no, thanks both April and Nader for joining us here on New Theory Radio. And again, one last time, if anybody wants to connect with Maskwell, what are the social media handles?
For sure. So our website is Get Maskwell, and then for social as well, you can just find us at Get Maskwell on Instagram, and that's the best place to find us and keep up with us too.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, April and Nader here on NTR. And we are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back with more here on News Talk Saga 960 AM.
You are listening to New Theory Radio. Theory Radio.
Welcome back to New Theory Radio, here live on News Talk Saga 960 AM. My name is Nav Nanwa. I am your host. And thank you for tuning in to our special Best of episode. And as promised, I did mention off the top, as well as via our social media, that we were going to have an announcement regarding some changes that we're making to NTR. Beginning next week on our first anniversary show, which will be celebrating our 1-year anniversary here at Saga 960 AM. And it's no secret that I have a huge passion for arts and pop culture, not just within my daily life and my consumption when it comes to music and media and movies, but as well as the passion that I have for the arts and culture scene here locally within Peel, so both Brampton and Mississauga, as well as pop culture and arts across the entire world. So as of next week, we are going to go from the show that theorizes on all things current affairs, pop culture, and everyday life to the show that only theorizes on arts and pop culture. Reason being is that we here at NTR have a huge passion for this space. A lot of the shows that we've done diving deep into different topics such as minority representation in the arts, such as technology within music, such as local music communities, the feedback we've gotten on these episodes, and the conversations that have been sparked because of these episodes have truly resonated with a lot of our listeners. It only makes sense that as we head into the second year of our tenure here at Saga 960 AM, that we really dive deep and we really narrow in on what a focus could be for NTR. And I'm very grateful for our team at Saga 960 AM for being supportive of our decision. And with this new revised focus of NTR will come some changes to the show. Number one, we are actually going to be changing the format of NTR. So we'll still be 2 hours. We're still going to be every Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. as well as Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. For the foreseeable future. The podcast version will still be available on Tuesdays on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere else. We're actually now available on Google Podcast and a whole bunch of other platforms as of this past week. And we'll definitely do our best to share that. But we are going to split the show up into two parts. We're going to have a pop culture panel every single week where we theorize on all of the hot pop culture and arts topics from the week. So this can be talking about the latest TV show that's streaming on Netflix. This can be involving an album that just got released. This can be involving just a pop culture story involving a celebrity or a musician or an artist or someone of influence that's really making waves throughout the entire news cycle. That's going to be something that we're going to be focusing on quite regularly. So we're going to have two guests joining us each and every week to be a part of this pop culture panel. As well, we are going to be introducing a brand new segment called the New Theory Spotlight. One of our biggest focuses here on New Theory Radio is to provide artists a platform, not just to talk about what they do, but to also share opinions on things that are going on in the world. And we like to call these opinions theories here on New Theory Radio. And we are going to have each week a segment dedicated to an artist, whether they're from Peel, whether they're from Canada, whether they're international, or even an organization. So an arts and culture organization can also get involved in this segment as well. And we are going to profile them. We're going to put the spotlight on them. And we are not only going to talk about the wonderful work that they're doing, but we're also going to get their thoughts on things that are going on within the arts and pop culture space. So exciting changes ahead. So I wanted to thank all of you for coming on this journey with us. This was a decision that we did think about for quite some time, and it just feels right for NTR moving forward. And I urge you to stay connected. We have some exciting announcements coming up this week as to who will be on our first anniversary show next week. Actually, we'll be announcing that this coming Thursday on Instagram, so definitely keep it locked. But if you want to connect with us, it is at New Theory Radio on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you want to connect with me, it is at Nav Nanwa on Instagram, at nnanwa on Twitter. Shoutouts to our graphics extraordinaire at Colorblind Photography _, aka my little brother Amit Nanwa. Go send him a follow on Instagram as well. He is responsible for all of our graphics when it comes to the audio clips, when it comes to our photography. As well as special shoutouts to Dusty Loops at Dusty Loops for being the producer behind our wonderful theme song. You might hear some more Dusty Loops beats now incorporated into the show because of these new segments that we're introducing. I also urge you to go support our station at Saga 960 AM across all platforms. They are doing a fantastic job in keeping everyone informed when it comes to all the major news that's breaking, as well as anything to do with the COVID-19 pandemic, As well, we are doing our part to support local businesses. So if you are someone that has been impacted by COVID-19, do reach out to our station, as we have some promotional plans that are also free for small businesses who are looking for support during this time. So definitely hit us up on social media if you're interested. This does conclude this week's edition of New Theory Radio. We are excited for our changes next week. And again, similar to what we had mentioned at the top, please continue to support each other. Please continue to confront injustice and racism, because it is truly unacceptable. And this is a wrap for this week's edition. So thanks again for tuning in, and you will hear all of us next time. Peace.
Right now, you need dependable internet and endless entertainment. Xfinity has you covered with reliably fast speeds and advanced security included with the X-Fi Gateway, so your connected devices are protected. And when it comes to TV, Xfinity is your home for all your streaming apps, like Peacock. Plus, get contactless service visits and equipment drop-off. Now that's simple, easy, awesome. Switch to Xfinity for reliable internet and access to your favorite apps right on your TV. To schedule your free contactless delivery, visit Xfinity.com or call 1-800-XFINITY. Restrictions apply. Right now, you need dependable internet and endless entertainment. Xfinity has you covered with reliably fast speeds and advanced security included with the X-Fi Gateway, so your connected devices are protected. And when it comes to TV, Xfinity is your home for all your streaming apps, like Peacock. Plus, get contactless service visits and equipment drop-off. Now that's simple, easy, awesome. Switch to Xfinity for reliable internet and access to your favorite apps right on your TV. To schedule your free contactless delivery, visit Xfinity.com or call 1-800-XFINITY. Restrictions apply.